Thank you very much. The story we're about to tell is the story you live every day. This is the best economy in my lifetime, and I'm older than you. This economy is so good that right now we're seeing stories that have never happened. People out of jail finding full employment and job security because of the job market. What's driving this is the Trump administration. The deregulation is the secret. There's so much of it we can't possibly cover it tonight. However, we can speak very carefully to the GDP report that just came out, to the jobs market everywhere, from Mississippi, but especially into Trump territory, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. We can also speak of trade. You hear much about it, especially if you read the Washington Post, the gloomy Gus. But we will speak of trade and the ongoing negotiation with the Chinese right now. We will also speak of an anecdote that happened in my New York City that I'm sure you read about. New York said no to Amazon. It's flabbergasting even to say it out loud. Those are the topics we'll cover. I thank you very much for your attention, and we will begin. I'm introducing my colleagues and guests. Maddie Batchelor is the Senior Fellow with the National Taxpayers Union. She's President of Forward Strategies. Liz Peek was a columnist at The Hill and Fox News, and Selena Zito of the Washington Examiner, and CNN, and the New York Post, and this book, The Story of Why Donald Trump Won November 8, 2016, The Great Revolt Inside the Populist Coalition. But that populist coalition needs to work, and we'll talk about that. So thank you very much, and we will begin. The first instance is that big GDP number, Wall Street Journal, plastered across, 2.9. But then if you read inside the story, there's a 3.1 number. So I want to start with Liz right now to explain the significance of that GDP number, how it translates into our lives. Liz, 2.9, 3.1, how does it go?
Well, the left would actually have you think it was 2.6. They keep bringing the numbers down. But in fact, quarter to quarter, the fourth quarter, the economy grew in real terms by 3.1%, better than expected, better than Barack Obama expected, better than Larry Summers expected. And why did that happen? You set the stage, John. Lower taxes, deregulation, and I think the most important element, a huge boom in consumer and business confidence. So what happened? The consumer began to spend, the consumer had better jobs, better wages, and again, had a more positive outlook on where the economy was going. Businesses, importantly, began to invest. John, you and I have talked over the last couple of years about the missing ingredient during Barack Obama's presidency, which was business investment. I don't think this story has really been told, but CEOs across America, big companies, little companies, were scared to death of the Obama administration. This is not an exaggeration. They were afraid that any moment they would be landed on incredible new regulations that they would have no way to figure out ahead of time. And as a result, they did what any prudent investor would do. They stopped spending. They stopped expanding. They didn't hire people because Obamacare came into effect. And they didn't know exactly how that was going to affect their cost structure. But they also didn't bring in new manufacturing plants. They didn't expand. So fast forward to President Trump, businesses are more optimistic. We got a tax cut that also included immediate expensing of capital goods, and businesses felt, you know, the amazing thing to me is that even as Paul Krugman and other people were talking about how the economy was going to crash if Donald Trump was elected, it literally took 48 hours before optimism from businesses and consumers went through the roof. And it hadn't done that during Barack Obama's entire presidency. So that's a bit of a diversion, But the truth is, it is that business spending that will give us the next leg up in the economy. Why? Because when you get businesses investing in new, more productive machinery and plant and equipment, then you get higher productivity, again, something we haven't seen in a decade, and that leads to wage gains. So it is a true virtuous circle, and that's what we're seeing now.
Maddie, the National Taxpayers Union tells me that you are very, very happy with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. However, we have heard voices of the opposition call it a sugar high. How do you respond to a sugar high that's, I've never had a sugar high that lasted 14 months. How do you respond?
14 months and counting, right? So Liz just nailed it on the changes we've seen in public policy and why they are so important for the average American to start to feel a difference. I want to add a little bit of context. Some of you are young Americans, maybe first starting off in your political careers. Maybe you haven't been following along for the last 10 years, but we have. Liz mentioned the Obama administration and the recovery. The economic growth rate during the recovery was 2.2%. So when you hear a number yesterday, whether it's 2.9%, referring to the average of the growth over the last year, or 3.1% quarter four to quarter four from 2017 to 2018, that is a darn good number. And that is happening against the backdrop of, as was mentioned before, changes in public policy that a lot of the media has told us would not actually incur those changes and would not produce that kind of growth. What Liz mentioned before about wages is so important. This is exactly what the administration promised would happen if we cut the corporate tax rate and we created an environment in which businesses can compete again in the United States. We had the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world at 35%. Brought that down to 21%, and what did we see as a result? We saw businesses that finally had certainty in their ability to invest, and they invested in those workers. One of the most pervasive characteristics of the recovery and why Americans didn't feel better, right? We heard this a lot from administration officials, green eye shade wearers here in Washington, D.C. The recovery is happening, America. Why don't you feel better? It's because the average American had not seen a wage increase for 10 years. So while their cost of living had gone up, perhaps economic circumstances and GDP had started to change, they looked around and they didn't feel like their own economic circumstances had changed at all. And that makes all the difference in the world. I'm sure that's something that Selena will talk about a little bit later on here. But when Americans start feeling that their paychecks are bigger and knowing that their economic circumstances are more secure, that's really when the recovery began in the most minds of Americans. And it's prudent that we have public policy that continues to foster that environment where Americans can see a better vision of future for themselves.
We want to translate these big numbers that you see in the Wall Street Journal to people's lives, and that's what Selena is going to guide us to. Selena is the author of the book that went and talked to America after it voted for Trump and said why. And those people had great faith that Donald Trump was going to live up to his campaign promise. He did. He was going to make America great again, and he was going to put it back to work. So we're going to turn to those working stories when we come back. Maddie Doppler of the National Taxpayers Union and president of Forward Strategy, Liz Peek of The Hill and Fox News and Fox Business, and Selena Zito of the Washington Examiner and CNN. I'm John Batchelor, and this is The John Batchelor Show. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. I am at the National Convention Center at the National Harbor of CPAC 2019. We are on stage to an audience that is now primed for wanting to know how it is that we go from GDP numbers and investment numbers, business-to-business investment, to people's lives. I have with me Maddie Doppler of the National Taxpayers Union, Liz Peek of The Hill and Fox News, and Selena Zito of the Washington Examiner, the reporter who covered Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin and Iowa, the states where Donald Trump took the election from the blue wall and gave it to the Republican Party. Those people who had voted for Obama twice, or those people who had stayed home with John McCain and Mitt Romney, those people came out and said, we believe that he's going to deliver jobs. Well, he did. Selena, there's a story in the Wall Street Journal. It's a tearjerker of a story about a young woman Cassandra's her name, in Mississippi, who was earning, I think, $850, certainly very poorly for her child. She's a single mother. And because the jobs market is so good, the local shipping yard, building warships for the US Navy to get the 355, recruited her to be an apprentice welder. She's now earning $19.50 an hour, and when she graduates, she'll be earning $27 an hour. It's a wonderful story. Rosie the Riveter, 2019. Do you see similar stories in the all-critical Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin?
Yes, absolutely. It actually is a really great job market right now. And to your point, what you were saying about small businesses not wanting to free up their stock, even larger, medium and larger size businesses, they were being very prudent. There was a lot of uncertainty during the Obama administration because they didn't know what the regulations were going to be. They didn't know what was coming next. And you see a willingness now to not only invest within their own companies, but also to expand and buy more product and hire more people. So let's just talk about a big job creator where I live. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the Paris of Appalachia, as I like to fondly call it. And energy is really booming in our area. We have what is called being built right now in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, which is sort of right on the border of West Virginia and Ohio. They're building a cracker plant. Now, we're not talking about saltines. This is within the shale industry. But it was creating 10,000 jobs in the 10 years that they are building the cracker plant. After the cracker plant is built, there's an additional 600 permanent jobs. But that's not even talking about the ancillary jobs that it creates outside of that. And what you also see, which is like fascinating, the sons and the daughters and the grandsons and daughters of coal miners who traditionally worked in those areas are now in high school getting the trade classes that they need to be able to work in the shale industry and walk out of high school and make $70,000 to $100,000 a year. In my area where I live, that is a lot of money. That is a whole lot of money. I would have been really happy to make that kind of money. And what's really great is that they're staying in their communities where they grew up. Why is that important? One of the most important things in the election of Donald Trump was people felt good about themselves, but they didn't feel good about their communities. They were worried about their communities. They were worried that they were crumbling. When President Trump said in his inauguration about carnage, I see it all the time. They saw it all the time. They lived it. So these kinds of jobs bring societal fabric back into these communities. And it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a generation. But that's a really important part of why he won.
One more anecdote, Selena. Indianapolis, also an area you cover, although it's a red state, I understand. However, the Wall Street Journal tells the story of a 59-year-old who spent many years in jail for selling drugs. He gets out, he's certainly senior to the jobs market. However, he gets a part-time job at FedEx, a Tennessee company, I'm reminded to say. He gets a part-time job at FedEx. He works his way up. They like him a lot. They give him a full job. This is ex-felon, drugs. Give him a full job. He's now got a wife, a house, a mortgage. Now, that never happened before in my lifetime. You get out of jail, you spend the rest of your life drifting in and out of bad situations if you live that long. But this jobs market is that good. And Selena, that's your region.
Yeah, I mean, there is something wonderful about the dignity of work. You know, everybody, this is America, right? We believe in second chances. We believe in redemption. We love that kind of story. And the Republicans have done and made amazing great strides on prison reform. And I think this is one of the things conservatives should be incredibly happy about. In fact, I saw Van Jones talk about that yesterday. It is something that you as conservatives should be shouting about all over the place. And dignity of work, that's all these people really want. And for at least a generation or two, they have not had the opportunity for job growth. I mean, that's why they've been mad at the establishments of both parties, not just the Democrats, but also the Republicans.
And John, this is why the story of economic growth is so important. We see the other side try to make a caricature out of economic growth. They characterize it as magic dust that you sprinkle over the economy and all of a sudden everyone has a job. When the reality is that when the economy is bigger, when the labor market is bigger, the people who are traditionally underemployed or unemployed actually have a chance to get pulled back into that labor market. We're seeing that right now with people who are living with disabilities, people who have criminal records. They are getting jobs for the first time because of the economy and because they've got a bigger shot at getting into that pie.
Not only are they getting jobs, the wages for that sector and for people who don't have high school degrees are growing the fastest in the country. Those are the people that are really employable for the first time ever. So it's a huge change.
Americans are incredibly aspirational. I mean, I think that's one of the things they missed about the Trump election. They looked at the phrase, "Make America Great Again," and they thought it was nationalistic. Sometimes people said it was bigoted or looking backwards. It's actually about being part of something bigger than yourselves. Americans love to come together and be together. And so I think that's what you sort of see as part of the attitude about this economy. You guys do the numbers great. But in terms of attitudes and what I see within the communities in which the areas which I cover, it's remarkably different. I mean,
it doesn't matter until you feel it, right?
Right. I mean, yes, there are definitely still issues. If you look at the Lordstown plant, the GM plant in Warren, Ohio, being closed, well, it's not being closed down. They're not getting a new car. Now, part of that has nothing to do with the workforce. It's one of the best workforces in this country. It's just that the Cruze, the car that it made, outlived itself. The economy's doing good, so what do we want? We want bigger cars. We don't want the little car. We don't need the little car. We want the big car. They haven't completely decided to scrap the plant. That would be ridiculous, but those are still some of the challenges that we face.
We're going to turn to, Selena just connected it to us, world trade, global trade, because we know that no matter where you are in America today, the only mistake you can make is not to go big enough with what you're selling or who you're working for. So when we come back, the trade story, this is CPAC 2019. I know what year it is. This is Maddie Doppler of the National Taxpayers Union, Liz Peek of The Hill and Fox News, and Selena Zito of the Washington Examiner, and this book, The Great Revolt, the story of the people who voted for Donald Trump November 8th, 2016, and you bet they will again. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. You bet I know how to hit my marks. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. I'm at CPAC 2019. I am discussing with my distinguished panel the rosy Trump economy, from Rosie the Riveter to the rosy Trump economy, the story that you will not hear on Capitol Hill when the Democrats are talking. Why? Because they're frightened of what we're telling you right now. The best economy in my lifetime. How old is he? Old enough. All demographics. But not only within those demographics, better and better jobs. However, we're growing globally. We're selling globally. An opportunity to talk to Japanese diplomats within these last hours. Japan's got a really sophisticated country, very sophisticated. AI, robots, although they all think that we think of Blade Runner. I said, no, it's not raining all the time in Japan. However, they want our attention just as we know that Toyotas are superior cars. They want our attention. They want to do business with us. Well, what does that mean about the US? Especially about the story that's in the headlines all the time right now, the trade negotiations with China. So I start with Liz about, in these last hours, we have reason to believe that the negotiations that the Trump campaign and then the Trump administration have very carefully structured to right now come to a crisis point or a success is moving very close because of our dear mutual friend Larry Kudlow, the director of the National Economics Council. I know he was with you in these last days. Larry has made a statement, Liz. How do you interpret it?
Well, Larry Kudlow is very optimistic about the trade talks. He is a free trader. I think go back 6 months, and he was very nervous about the aggressive stance that the Trump administration was taking vis-a-vis China. My view is this should have been done 10 years ago. I have been talking to CEOs of big companies for over a decade who basically have been pummeled in Japan. And let me just tell you why this happens. You hear a lot about intellectual property theft, and it's sort of in the clouds sort of conversation. What happens is this, and what they're trying to change is this. When you go to China to open a business, they say, oh, sure, we'd like to have you here. And by the way, you have to have a 50-50 joint venture partner, and here's your partner. So you take in this partner, and basically you go into business together. Everything's going fine. Meanwhile, you've shared with him your blueprints, your manufacturing processes, et cetera. This actually happened to people I know extremely well, and it's very common. 2 years later, you find your business falling off mysteriously, can't figure out why. Turns out your partner has taken all that information that you've given him and opened an exactly similar replica plant 5 miles down the road, and he's undercutting you on price. That happens over and over again. That is what we talk about forced technology transfer. That's sort of a highfalutin phrase. It's thievery, and that's what's been going on really for 20 or 30 years. And by the way, it all started when they let China in the World Trade Organization. So there's a lot of bad blood here, and frankly, it's Republicans and Democrats. It's the Chamber of Commerce, who's been sort of backing our relationship with China because big companies wanted access to the Chinese market. It's 1 billion people. Of course, they want to be there. 350 million new middle-class consumers, et cetera. But this is what's wrong. It is not a level playing field, and you can argue about whether tariffs is the right way to go or not. The Trump administration is totally on point here, and it amuses me to see the left-wing media say, oh, he's going to give in, he's not going to go for a big deal. No one's ever even done anything before. So this is high time. It's an aggressive posture. I'm optimistic because Lighthizer is involved and Wilbur Ross. Don't count out Wilbur because he's a smart guy. I think these people know what they're doing. China is suffering a tremendous slowdown in their growth. And Xi Jinping is president for life, but even Xi Jinping has to basically make sure that his people are in good shape. So I'm sorry I took too much time, but the basic thrust of this is I think we're going to get a deal, and I think it's going to be very good news for American farmers and American manufacturers.
Maddie, you have the distinction of being brave and living in this town, where Liz and I hide in New York.
It's braver living in New York, are you
kidding? She's in the Paris of Appalachia, all right? We're in Manhattan, where we're a lot more comfortable with the fact that if we don't have a bottom line, we don't talk. But this is not a bottom line town. So what is the expectation here, if there is one, of these trade talks?
Well, the expectation initially was that something would happen today. March 1st was the deadline for tariffs to rise on Chinese products. The president said that the United States negotiators had made enough progress that he felt he could delay that timeline. So the next question is not only what will happen, but when. One of the backdrop against the American and United States and Chinese trade war is that the market, of course, has responded to every single rumor and whisper about what's happening within those negotiations, and that's what led in part to an extremely volatile December on the stock market. Now, that's not necessarily bad, but it does mean that we need to take in stride the fact that the economy is responding to our negotiations with the second largest economy in the world. Liz really laid out all the problems that we have with China and the fact that American leadership has not had the courage to take on those challenges with China, because the fact of the matter is that we import a heck of a lot of stuff that we like from China as well, right? The fact that our trade relationship with China is so complex is because they allow us to buy goods that Americans like to have. So the question then, of course, is what does victory look like for the administration? I personally would like to see tariffs done away with. Tariffs are taxes that are paid at the border by American consumers, and we've seen the impact that that has had on American businesses. Getting rid of tariffs in a way that creates a productive environment for the United States to hold China accountable in the future is really the crucial component to me. The administration certainly has its work cut out for it to define what that looks like. I think what we can expect is probably an initial deal that outlines a lot of the problems that Liz just detailed here and how we start to get our arms around them, and then probably a timeline that allows the United States to understand and monitor whether or not that's being executed and whether or not the Chinese have held up their part of the deal.
We vote our pocketbooks, and I want to go to the Trump voter in the critical states. Does China translate? Does the thievery of China translate to people in Pittsburgh and Youngstown, Ohio?
Yeah, I mean, there was even a very big case of stealing intellectual property in Pittsburgh from China. Was one of the.
Well, you're robot town.
I know we are, and I don't like robots at all. Sorry.
Carnegie Mellon is robots.
I know. We have driverless cars all over Pittsburgh. It's kind of freaky.
Even with all those bridges.
Yeah. Well, but you know, what people don't like is what you were both talking about, is the unfairness, right? People love to go to Walmart and buy the things that they need for their family that's inexpensive, and they are able to have those supplies in their house. Having said that, they don't like China having the unfair trade practices and the cheating. And so there's a negative attitude towards them on that issue.
Liz?
Well, and we've lost millions of jobs. I mean, let's just bring it down to the reason that blue-collar workers were ready to listen to Donald Trump is because they haven't seen a wage increase in 20 years, really, in terms of real terms. And why is that? Because there's been this constant sucking of jobs to Mexico, to China, et cetera. The good news is China's losing jobs too, and has a demographic cliff, so to speak. China has serious economic issues in front of it. So I don't think that they're going to be quite the powerhouse competitor that they've been in the past, but it's not over.
We have other trading partners. I know today in the Journal, Liz, that the European stock markets have had their best start, I don't know, in a long time. The Europeans are weenies. We don't trust them. They don't trust their own markets. We need them to prosper. I understand there's a lot of enmity in this country towards Brussels, and why not? There's a lot of sympathy toward Brexit, and why not? But your measure of the Europeans, do they believe in themselves enough to continue the investment? Because they need everything, and we need them as a partner.
Is this for me? Well, I think Europe has slowed down partly because of China's slowdown last year. They're sort of struggling with all kinds of excess regulations. Honestly, what Europe needs is Donald Trump. Right. They need to lower taxes. They need less regulation. If I had been living in England, I would have voted for Brexit because they were strangling in EU regulations. And that is not, that is not a crazy position. If you ask anybody who is trying to do business in Germany or in France, God knows, or wherever, they're going to tell you the same thing. They are growing, but the demographics look terrible. The populations aren't growing very much. They're going to do fine, but they're not going to, look, they're all looking at the United States. They laughed at Donald Trump when he spoke to the UN last year. Guess what? Every single European leader would trade places with Donald Trump.
And let me just say, Europe is learning the wrong story from the United States. They look at the United States and rather than trying to import the tax reform and the regulatory reform that we have implemented here, they look at our most successful companies and they say, we need to tax more of them. Right now, they're trying to erect new tax barriers for American tech companies, and they have not been shy about the fact that they want to go after those companies specifically because they are American tech companies. There's a reason that story is being told here, and the fact that entrepreneurs want to invest in businesses here. Europeans need to learn that lesson rather than trying to extort those companies for more wealth when they already pay their fair share over in the UK and in the European countries. They've got a lot to learn, I think, Liz.
Meanwhile, our socialists want to import their problems here.
Liz always provides me with a bridge, because we're going to talk about our socialists in the last
There
segment.
you go.
Maddie Doppler of the National Taxpayers Union, Liz Peek of The Hill and Fox News, Selena Zito of The Great Revolt, Washington Examiner, CNN, The New York Post, I'm John Batchelor. This is CPAC 2019. And what happens next? Amazon and the Democrats. I'm John Batchelor. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. An unbelievable story. Hollywood will not buy it. The richest man in the solar system has a company that works. Everything works about Amazon. They decide, who knows why, to invest in New York City, Queens, New York City, Long Island City, New York City, a rundown area that nobody's thought about developing for, well, since the Second War. So they make a decision. They split half of their new headquarters in Virginia, right across from you. Good for everybody here. And the other half they're put in Long Island City. At first I thought, are they crazy? And then I thought, all right, maybe they know what they're doing. And then comes the word. New York Democrats reject Amazon. You won't believe it. Nobody will buy it, but that's a fact. So I want to go to my distinguished panel to ask why this happens and what this tells us about these two parties who are now maneuvering for the 2020 election. Maddie, I begin with you. They said no in New York to 25,000 family formation jobs.
Right.
Andrew Cuomo is in the papers today begging Bezos to reconsider. It's not going to happen. Maddie, why did this happen?
Jeff Bezos did what none of the politicians in Washington, D.C. could do, which is he united the left and the right to say that this was a terrible thing for New York to be doing, to offer special carve-outs to a special corporate interest, and they are right. This is a terrible way to make public policy. However, Democrats who were in on this decision, it's not like they just found out of it, right? All these city officials knew exactly what was happening and what New York was offering to Amazon to come to Queens. Decided the last minute that they couldn't withstand the terrible pressure of importing 25,000 new jobs to Long Island City. Now, this is a question for public policymakers everywhere. What kind of environment do you want to be building? Do you want to be building an environment that not only induces Amazon to come and invest in your communities, but one that is a climate that the next Amazon and the next entrepreneur wants to start their business there because they know they'll be successful, they know government won't stand in their way, and they'll be able to run their business in a way that is prosperous for themselves and for their employees. That is what public policymakers should be asking themselves, rather than making special carve-outs for one singular interest. Now, I do think it is fascinating that Democrats were able to say thanks but no thanks to 25,000 jobs, especially in an economy where jobs are everywhere and employers are looking to be the people who can make that next big hire. I think it's especially ironic that this news broke the same week that Andrew Cuomo was in Washington, D.C., pleading with Donald Trump to repeal a cap on state and local taxes, saying you can't do this to us, we tax our New Yorkers too much, they need to be able to deduct their property taxes from their federal tax liability. The inanity of not being able to say, hey, maybe we've created an environment where taxes are too high and we need to look at that. And instead going to Washington and try and argue that the tax environment is too bad for taxpayers and that Washington, D.C. needs to make it an easier problem for you, I think is just, it reflects how the Democrats think about economic policy and certainly sets them up for an interesting conversation for 2020.
Liz, we live in a blue wasteland. We're used to it.
Yeah.
But even as cynical as we become, this was hard to believe.
Actually, when Amazon announced that they were going to move to New York City, I was ready to short the stock. I was like, what are they thinking? Why would they do that? It is my hometown. I love New York City, but what is de Blasio all about? He's about putting in any kind of regulation that makes it harder for businesses, paid family leave, all kinds of things that raise costs on employers. By the way, these aren't just any kind of jobs. These are $150,000 a year jobs. They're expensive jobs. So what is this platform for 2020, folks? Democrats kill jobs, Republicans create jobs. That's it. That's the story, and New York City is the best example we can come up with.
The Paris of the Appalachia is a perfect place for Amazon headquarters, Selena.
We were one of the finalists.
You've got Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah.
You've got the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Pittsburgh Steelers. What else could they ask for?
Well, Pirates, I don't know.
They're
I know how national
they're
fans
an
feel now.
aspirational team. Does Pittsburgh want Amazon?
Well, yes, Pittsburgh did want Amazon. It was one of the final cities. But I thought actually, to me, this was a really good look at the split in the Democratic Party. Because I went and talked to Mayor Tito Brown he's a Democrat. He beat a Democrat incumbent out of his seat for mayor. And I asked him about this. What would you do?
Youngstown, Ohio.
From Youngstown, Ohio. You know, they lost 7,000 jobs on one day on September 19th, 1977. One day. Changed the whole landscape of the Steel Valley. And they have all of this property that has literally sat there since 1977. I said, what would you do? He said, we can't do that. We have to be able to be job creators. We have to be a party of job creators. He said, like, you know, I don't want to give away a lot, but Youngstown doesn't have a lot to give away. I mean, you know, not like New York City or not like Queens. He said, you know, we need those kinds of jobs. We need to be able to tell that story. And so I think this shows the split in the party in a way that—
In the Democratic Party.
In the Democratic Party, that in a way that we're really not talking about. You know, Democrats in Youngstown, Ohio, or in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, they're much more pragmatic, and they'd be much more excited about this possibility. Maybe not about the giveaways, but certainly about the ability to have families have the dignity of work, families to be able to have good paying jobs, and for them to be, the company to be pushed out on ideological points of view is not—
But the problem is, the energy in the Democratic Party is not with the Youngstown mayor.
No, it's for
The
confiscation.
energy is with the socialists who are now the thought leaders
That's
of the
absolutely
Democratic
true.
Party, and whose Green New Deal, which we don't have time to discuss here today, has in it providing jobs for those unwilling to work, or providing income for those unwilling to work. That is un-American. These people are un-American in my view, and they're not a positive element for the Democratic Party, and I hope that means that Donald Trump is reelected in 2020.
Maddie, every time I see an announcement from Bernie Sanders or Liz Warren or now Cory Booker, I have to put up on my Twitter feed for my audience, which depends upon me to be straight, okay? I have to put up "not the onion." Nationalizing healthcare, nationalizing boards by forcing people on their panel, you know, private corporations. We have 40 seconds.
Yeah.
Not the onion, right?
Not
It's
the
really
onion,
happening.
not the onion, but it is the Democratic 2020 primary. And so it will be interesting to watch these candidates debate these ideas amongst one another, because eventually someone is going to stand up and say, show your math. You can't have 15 people on one stage propagating the same fallacy without one person saying, listen, your math doesn't work, show it. And once one person stands up and says that, and you've seen this from some of the people in the Democratic primary who've been reticent to adopt some of these ideals, the other dominoes will start to fall. It's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Maddie Batchelor of the National Taxpayers Union, president of Forward Strategy, Liz Peek of The Hill and Fox News and Fox Business, Selena Zito of The Great Revolt, as well as Washington Examiner, CNN. Thank you very much. CPAC 2019, I'm John Batchelor.